you know, there's the search for extraterrestrial life can take different forms, and one of the forms it takes is, you know, like what's going on now with the James Webb Space Telescope, where we can image other planets, we can study their atmospheres and see, do the atmospheres have biosignatures? Yeah. And that's a legitimate scientific project.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Crab and the Cross podcast. I'm your host, Mary Rose, and today I sit down with the legendary Catholic apologist, Jimmy Akin. I first knew of Jimmy Akin through his work with Catholic Answers, and I always appreciated his thorough, calm, rational analysis and explanation of the Catholic faith. But then I discovered that he has a passion for all things mysterious, whether it is mysteries of the natural universe, mysteries of history, including conspiracies, or mysteries of the paranormal. He covers it all in his very popular podcast, Mysterious World. So whether you are a believer in the possibility of life outside of this planet, or whether or not you believe in man's potential parapsychological powers, I think you will enjoy this conversation that I have with Jimmy Akin. Not only is he super educated in philosophy and theology, but he's also taking classes in parapsychology, which is a very rare combination for a Catholic. So sit back and explore the mysterious world with myself and Jimmy Akin. Jimmy Akin is an apologist for Catholic Answers and has worked for them for the past 30 years. He's the author of multiple books on Catholic apologetics. He's the host of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World podcast and appears as a frequent guest on Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
So I've been a fan of your podcast really since it came out. I've listened to almost every episode. And actually, I was a teacher last year, and I had my students listen to an episode as an assignment. So I love spreading the good news of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. But I know that you were in the work of, apologetics theology a long time before that. So I know you're a convert to the Catholic faith, but what's kind of your educational background that got you, equipped for that work in apologetics?
Well, so my academic background is in analytic philosophy, and I got a bachelor's in that. I went to grad school, and philosophy is very similar in various respects to apologetics. It involves testing ideas and so forth. And as a Christian philosopher, I was naturally interested in apologetics. I was not originally Catholic. I was raised nominally Protestant, and then when I was 20, I had a conversion experience to Christ and became an evangelical. And I realized that what church has the music I like, or the preaching I like, or is within convenient driving distance is not a good test for theological truth. And so I made a practice early on as an evangelical of studying the theology of all different branches of Christianity.
Wow.
So that, I wouldn't just through habit fall into a particular branch that I found convenient. And I read through the Bible, and when I did that, I found verses that sounded Catholic to me. Whoever sins you forgive, they are forgiven. Whoever sins you retain, they are retained. I mean, that sounds like the sacrament of confession, just
Absolutely.
to give one example.
Yeah.
And eventually I decided I needed to take another look at the claims of the Catholic faith with an open mind. And so while I was in grad school, I spent a year doing that. And I eventually concluded that the Catholic faith is the expression of biblical New Testament Christianity, and I needed to become a Catholic. So because I had years of experience as an evangelical, I had a lot to reconsider. I had a lot to, review and
Right.
and reevaluate. And that, in essence, gave me a background not just in Christian apologetics, which I already had from, philosophy and other studies,
Right.
but it gave me a background, specifically that reevaluation process gave me a background in Catholic apologetics. And so I then ended up auditioning for a job at Catholic Answers, and I've been here for the last 30 years. But it's my background in Catholic apologetics in particular is really self-study,
Okay.
which is what most of my study is. I'm an autodidact, and so I'm constantly studying different subjects, and most of the learning I do is self-guided study, and
Okay.
also, on-the-job work experience.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even for myself, I was raised Catholic, and I do have degrees in Catholic theology, but I spent the last 8 years as a teacher, and you have to learn so much on the job. There's specific topics or specific questions that students ask that maybe weren't covered in the courses that you took formally. And so you're going to be diving into self-study really no matter what. But yeah, I think having that Protestant background and then converting to Catholicism probably in a way gives you the best background for apologetics, because you were asking all those questions and had to answer all those questions for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So something else you've mentioned in your Mysterious World podcast is that you're also taking classes in, is it paranormal psychology?
Parapsychology.
Parapsychology. Okay. What is that?
Well, parapsychology is essentially, a short explanation of it is it's the study of psychic phenomena.
Okay.
So it doesn't include UFOs. It doesn't include Bigfoot. It does include alleged psychic abilities like telepathy and clairvoyance and precognition and things like that. And although there are people who are just kind of casually into the subject,
Right.
it is a real scientific field.
Right.
The Parapsychological Association is part of, the American Academy of Sciences, and I've taken some classes. Now, with parapsychology, as with anything else, I'm primarily an autodidact, so I primarily do self-guided study.
Okay.
But I have taken classes at the Rhine Education Center, which is an outgrowth of the work of J.B. Rhine, who was one of the most influential parapsychologists of the 20th century, and they have a focus on the academic scientific study of these issues.
Okay. So are you studying, are you studying a lot of neuropsychology or neurobiology, or is it more kind of like field studies, like tests and experiments?
Mm-hmm. There's a mix.
Okay.
They offer a wide range of courses. The ones that I've taken, at least thus far, have tended to focus on field studies.
Okay.
In fact, I completed their advanced field studies course, and I'm now certified with the Office of Paranormal Investigations as a field investigator.
Wow.
And I also have taken, courses on more specific subjects with a scientific focus, like psychokinesis, and what do scientific studies have to say about that. And so it's kind of a mix.
Okay. So in your research, have you, I know you've talked about different cases on the podcast, but have you personally encountered any psychic phenomena that you could verify?
Well, I have. So there's a difference between my own experience and what people have reported to me.
Okay.
And I have worked with people privately who have reported paranormal things happening around them. I've worked, for example, with a poltergeist case.
Wow.
That was reported by one of my listeners. In my own experience, I have noticed for a number of years, because on Catholic Answers, I'm on our radio show, I'm regularly asked lots of questions frequently on very obscure topics.
Yeah.
And so I noticed a number of years ago that I would find myself thinking about or studying a particular obscure topic that was not in the news. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't, people weren't talking about it, more broadly. And then within 48 hours, I would be asked a question about it on Catholic Answers
Oh,
Live.
weird. Yeah.
And this happened enough that I took note of it, and I thought, well, this could just be God giving me a nudge,
Sure.
to be ready to answer this question when I'm asked about it. I started keeping a spreadsheet of it, of when this happens, and it seems to happen about once or twice a month.
Wow.
And so that could be explained in terms of God is giving me a nudge. It could be explained in terms of precognition. It could be that I'm subconsciously precognizing a question I'm going to be asked about soon and getting ready for it. It could be explained both. If psychic functioning is real, it's something that God built into human nature. And so like God uses other aspects of human nature, he could be using that to help me help other people more.
Right. Well, it's interesting because, you talk about, potential psychic phenomenon as being a natural power, maybe something that is not fully utilized at this moment. But there's also a lot of people who claim to have, I guess, sort of like psychic powers, but more from a supernatural lens. So, psychics, mediums, various kinds of clairvoyance. And that's something that is, explicitly forbidden by the Catholic Church. So how do we differentiate between, pardon?
Where?
Whereas, you're not allowed to visit a medium, right? You're not allowed to visit a psychic. Is that?
The church, okay, so there's a difference between a medium and a psychic.
Okay.
A medium is a person who conjures spirits for purposes of getting information.
Right.
And that is forbidden at various places in the Old Testament. In particular, it's forbidden in Deuteronomy 18. And the church, if you look in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it says the church, for her part, warns people against this activity.
Okay.
But that's different than a psychic. In the case of a medium, you're contacting a spirit.
Okay.
In the case of a psychic, you're relying on an ability that is supposed to be part of human nature. Now, whether you believe in them in psychic functioning or not, that's what psychic abilities are supposed to be. They're supposed to be natural human abilities that are just poorly understood. Kind of like our sense of smell.
Yeah.
We have, as humans, we have senses of smell, but our sense of smell compared to like that of a dog is weak and unreliable.
Right.
Dogs have much better senses of smell than we do. Well, it could be that there are, and we really don't have five senses. We commonly talk about the classic five, but really there's a bunch more. I mean, there's like temperature sense and sense of balance and all kinds of other senses. So it could be that we have these additional senses that are part of human nature, but at least in our present fallen state, they are weak and unreliable. Like our sense of smell.
Yeah.
But, and in fact, there have been Catholic parapsychologists like Father Alois Weisinger and Father Herbert Thurston, who have speculated that that psychic functioning may be remnants of the gifts that our first parents would have had before the fall.
Oh, interesting.
But that just don't work as well now that we're in a fallen state.
Huh.
And there have been doctors of the church like St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, who believed in psychic functioning. Both St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas believed in what we would call precognition.
Yeah.
And St. Thomas Aquinas referred to it as natural prophecy to distinguish it from the supernatural prophecy that God gives. And one of the things that Aquinas said about natural prophecy is that it's partially reliable, but it's not completely reliable the way supernatural prophecy that comes from God is. St. Thomas Aquinas also believed in what we would call I mentioned precognition. He also believed in what we would call psychokinesis, which is mind over matter, the ability for mental states to influence things in the physical world. That was his explanation for the evil eye. He thought it was possible when the soul is vehemently moved by hatred for that to affect another person in a kind of psychic attack. And he wrote about that. He didn't write about the reverse, which would be, could you, if the soul is vehemently moved by love, could you maybe heal somebody with that as a natural ability? But he did believe in psychokinesis in general.
Right.
Well, it's interesting that you were comparing it to the sense of smell earlier, because I know that, some scientists will talk about, we pick up on these pheromones, and they're sort of subconscious in a way. It's not like when you walk down the stairs in the morning, you smell coffee, you smell bacon, where consciously what you're smelling, but maybe you're around somebody and you pick up on, these pheromones. Some people even say that's partially the basis for attraction, and it's not something that you can consciously say like, oh, I like your smell, But I guess like when I think about, you've definitely changed my mind on psychics to a certain extent, because you've talked about on your show people like who do things like remote viewing and stuff like that. But I guess the more commonly accepted, or maybe the more commonly familiar notion of a psychic is like somebody who they do palm readings, and maybe they have like a crystal ball, they do the tarot cards. You have these, and maybe they're conflating the terms as a psychic medium. But just to clarify, visiting somebody like that would be forbidden by the church, correct?
Well, according to the Catechism, means that falsely unveil the future, like fortune telling, and they have in mind, things like, they don't name them all, but they have in mind things like, the fortune tellers you see at carnivals and things like that. That's forbidden.
Okay.
Or, at least the church warns against it, because it doesn't really unveil the future. It's superstition.
I see.
And the church has a prohibition on superstition. But that's different than the scientific study of phenomena like this. That's something the church does not have a teaching on. And in general, the church is supportive of scientific studies. And so in principle, parapsychological research is legitimate. It just needs to be done in a way that's consistent with the Christian faith.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction. It kind of gets...
It's difficult because there are so many frauds.
Yeah.
There are lots of people who are fortune tellers and stuff who are just out and out frauds. They use magicians' techniques like hot reading and cold reading to generate the illusion of psychic functioning. Hot reading is where you research someone in advance. Like if you know someone, let's say you're a performer, and a particular person is going to be coming to your performance, and so you read their Facebook page.
Wow.
and you discover, oh, okay, this person who's going to be coming to my performance, they went to an Apple festival last week. And then in your performance you say, someone in the audience went to an Apple festival last week, raise your hands. Or the opposite of that is, or a different version of that is cold reading, where you don't research a person in advance, but you do throw out general things that are going to fit somebody in the audience.
Right.
Like, someone here has a loved one you're concerned
right,
about.
Right. Someone here is a human being.
Yeah. And so the church definitely warns people away from frauds. It warns people away from calling on spirits. It definitely warns people away from calling on demons.
Right.
But it doesn't warn people away from the scientific study of phenomena, including this.
Okay. Yeah. So this kind of gets into one of the big topics I want to talk to you about, which is just this whole notion of curiosity. I mean, I love your show because it piques my curiosity on topics that are maybe a little bit on the fringe, not part of your everyday experience. And so I really like that. But I've also read just in different saints and spiritual writers, they say things like, avoid an unhealthy curiosity or avoid an excessive curiosity. And I guess kind of describing it as something that might lead towards sin. And so what do you think is the difference between that kind of curiosity that seems to be warned about by different spiritual writers versus this just thirst for knowledge, even if it includes the paranormal or the supernatural or the kind of fringe information?
Well, I think that the difference is, what are you doing to obtain knowledge? There's nothing wrong with wanting to know stuff. God built that desire into us. And so in principle, if someone wants to know something, that's fine.
Yeah.
But what are you doing to get that knowledge? That's where the moral question comes in. For example, suppose I'm really curious about an obscure fact, and the only place I know I can get that fact is in a book that's published by Brill Publishers from the Netherlands. Now, Brill Publishers publish some really obscure stuff, and they charge fantastically high prices for it. I mean, you can pay $800 for a book from Brill.
Wow.
And so suppose I'm a struggling college student, I got a young family, I got a wife, I got a baby I need to feed. Is it really good for me to spend $800 to buy a book from Brill Academic Publishers to learn the answer to this one little question?
Yeah.
Well, it may not be.
Yeah.
And that would be a form of unhealthy curiosity, because it's leading me to neglect my obligations to my family in order to satisfy this curiosity. And neglecting your obligations to your family is a bad thing. So that would be a kind of unhealthy curiosity. Another kind of unhealthy curiosity would be, suppose there's something I really want to know, and the only place I can think to get the answer is by asking a demon. Well, I shouldn't be asking a demon.
Yeah.
You know,
Don't mess with demons.
Exactly. So, so that would be a kind of unhealthy curiosity. Or someone may have told me that I can get the answer I'm after by using a bogus superstitious practice, you know, something that doesn't really work. Well, okay, superstition is bad, and I shouldn't be using superstitious practices to try to get the information I'm after. Wanting the information is fine. You know, there's God built us with curiosity, and it's part of how we navigate the world is by learning about it. But it becomes unhealthy and counterproductive and even sinful when we do things to obtain knowledge that we shouldn't be doing, whether it's neglecting our responsibilities or using inappropriate means that don't work, or using forbidden means like talking to demons and things like that.
What about, though, I have like a terrible bad habit where, like, when I am bored, I just go onto a website and start looking at, you know, I don't know, I check the news, or I check like celebrity gossip, or just things that are really, you know, pointless knowledge for me to have. Like, do you think, I mean, it's obviously not bad to go on the internet or to go to a website, but, you know, when we're talking about things like gossip, or things like, you know, slanderous news articles, would you say that that's something that would fall into the realm of unhealthy curiosity?
It can, sure.
Yeah.
You know, doom scrolling, where you're just going through a web page and feeding yourself constant negative news.
Yeah.
Well, that can be unhealthy for you.
Yeah.
It can lead you to have overly polarized opinions about other people. It can lead you to draw, you know, to have false views of other people because of the distorting effect of the media. There are other things like, you know, celebrity gossip and stuff. And some of that's harmless, you know, just, oh, what's this person up to now? You know, that's reasonable. But if you're, you know, wanting to study the, you know, the sex lives of celebrities and stuff, it's like, is that really your business?
Right. Well, they certainly broadcast it, but that doesn't mean we should view it, or, you know. Yeah.
Now, at the same time, we don't want to be overly scrupulous about this, because humans are social creatures. We live in a social world, and it, you know, historically we lived in tribes, and there's a certain amount of background knowledge, even if it's not immediately relevant. It can be useful to have background knowledge about what's going on in the tribe, you know. Right. So, for example, let's suppose I'm a member of some tribe, and there are people in the tribe who are having an affair. Well, that could cause problems down the road. You know, if that leads to jealousy and attacks and things like that, it can be useful. There can be even if the knowledge is not immediately useful, it can be useful to have background knowledge about what's going on in society. So I don't think we should be overly scrupulous about this, but in principle, yeah, there are things that really are not our business that we shouldn't be overly concerned about learning.
Right. So then, kind of going back to psychic research, what do you think are some uses of psychic phenomenon that would be, you know, I guess legitimate, or maybe not legitimate, but permissible or useful? I mean, obviously I shouldn't, you know, use attempt to use psychic powers to kind of, see into somebody's private life or something like that. But what do you think are some of the good uses that we could potentially develop psychic powers for?
Well, it depends on whether psychic functioning is real.
Yeah.
If it's real, then there would be all kinds of potential uses for it. There have been claims, for example, of people who were able to psychically diagnose illness.
Oh, wow.
And being able to diagnose someone's illness, if it's a medical mystery, the doctors can't figure it out, but if someone were able to, diagnose it and recommend a potential treatment, well, that obviously would be very useful. There are people who use precognitive remote viewing to predict the stock market.
Oh, wow.
Or to predict the outcome of sporting events and make money betting on them.
And you don't think there's any like moral, that's not morally dangerous, that's neutral?
Well, it's the same. I mean, anytime someone bets on a sporting event or invests in the stock market, in the stock market, they're betting that the stock is going to go up.
Right.
And the question is just, well, how do you get that information? If you could get it by, doing a study of the company or a study of the sports team and reasoning your way to it in a kind of analytical way, people don't see anything wrong with that. Mm-hmm. Well, if you could get the same information by intuiting it, it would be accomplishing the same effect. So I don't see why it would be morally different. It would just be a different path to getting the same information.
That's interesting. You talk a decent amount about UFOs, aliens, that kind of, I don't want to call it supernatural because it's natural, but it's super
that would be paranormal.
Paranormal. Okay. Yeah. Which I'm fascinated by personally. But it, kind of, there's a pragmatist in me that says, is this really what our government should be spending money on or what scientists should be researching? I mean, we still haven't cured cancer. We still haven't, there's plenty of people who go without clean drinking water. Do you think that there's a practical element to keeping these kinds of inquiries to the fringe or to the peripheries of funding and research, or do you think there's actually a case that can be made to say, no, we should prioritize the exploration for extraterrestrial life or things like that?
Okay, so there's the search for extraterrestrial life can take different forms, and one of the forms it takes is like what's going on now with the James Webb Space Telescope, where we can image other planets, we can study their atmospheres and see, do the atmospheres have biosignatures? Yeah. And that's a legitimate scientific project. Now, there's always a question in government of what's a reasonable amount of funding for something. And because that's what economics is. Economics is the study of limited resources that have alternative uses. And money is a limited resource, and it has alternative uses. So it's the job of our elected officials to figure out, and with private funding as well, private funders, it's their job to figure out what's it worth spending, what's the best use of this money? What can we spend it on that will be helpful? Now, personally, I think that it's reasonable to use the James Webb Space Telescope to do some searching. If we found extraterrestrial life through that means, it would be revolutionary.
Yeah.
It would be a big deal. Then there's the kind of research that the Defense Department is doing, where they have these UFOs or unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs, that are showing up in our airspace during military exercises, and they don't know what they are or where they're coming from. Okay, that's a threat. That's a defense threat. And it doesn't matter whether it's aliens or the Chinese or the Atlanteans or whoever it is. There's somebody putting craft in our airspace in military exercises that we don't understand.
Right.
Well, that's a defense threat, and I think it's reasonable to study that. Now, I wouldn't tank the economy
Right.
to study that, but it's reasonable to say, okay, is this some kind of spycraft? Is it what if it is? What information is it picking up? Could it be a weapons delivery system? And so I think that it's reasonable to devote some funding to that. It's just a question of how much.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, maybe the aliens will help us cure cancer. You never know.
Maybe they would. Maybe they've already got a cure and they could just adapt it for us.
Right, right. So, in your deep down, like, heart of hearts, if you were a betting man, where do you lean on the topic of extraterrestrial life? Do you think that aliens are real?
Well, if I had to bet, now I don't have proof.
Yeah.
And I have yet to encounter and this is a separate question than have they come here?
Yeah.
But just the question, is there intelligent life elsewhere in the universe? Well, we know of at least one other kind of intelligent life that exists, angels. And so if God created us and God created angels, I don't see why God wouldn't have created more than that. You know,
Yeah.
we've got a really, 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 really big universe here.
Right, right.
And so my guess is, yeah, if I had to guess, and it's only a guess, but if I had to guess, I'd say, yeah, there probably is intelligent life out there somewhere.
Yeah. I want it to be true. I just, the curious part of me just wants it to be true. But then there's another part of me that says, well, when you look at scripture and you look at the way that God, like, kind of picks, like, the little things, to elevate, part of me thinks, well, maybe he really just chose this little speck in the universe, just like he chose the Israelites, who were this, very small, powerless tribe. Like, maybe he just chose this one planet to put intelligent life on in his image and likeness, and he made the rest of the universe for us, which is, an extravagant way of looking at things. But there's part of me that says, well, maybe that is in line with God's kind of doting on the little things.
Well, maybe he did.
Yeah. I don't know, but I love the question. I love thinking about it. I also love talking about the theological implications of aliens. Like, do we preach the gospel to aliens, or have they already had their own incarnation,
So for that question, I'd like to recommend a specific episode of Mysterious World that I devoted exclusively to the questions of the theological implications of discovering intelligent alien life. It's episode 55, and people can reach it by going to mysterious.fm, as in FM radio, mysterious.fm/55 for episode 55. So mysterious.fm/55. That will take you to my discussion of the theology of intelligent alien life.
Nice. Yeah. And just for those who might not have heard the podcast, you're also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all those things. You might be able to search Jimmy Akin Aliens. It might come up. And in your website on the SQPN one, I like it because you have all your podcasts, and then you can, like, search them by category. So you can say, well, I like paranormal stuff, or I'm more interested in, you also cover, like, religious things, like, apparitions, you cover some historical mysteries. So it's cool that somebody who can kind of narrow down, like, what they're interested in.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. One last question for you. This is kind of a weird question, since you're known for doing weird questions with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live. And this kind of fits with the topic of extraterrestrial life, but more so, if we humans become the extraterrestrial life, if we leave Earth and colonize Mars, which really might happen in the next 20 or 30 years. I mean, it's hard to believe that it's been less than a century that we first went to the moon. It does not shock me at all that we could be on Mars in, less than a century. But Mars has different days than we do. So how do you think the liturgical calendar would work on Mars?
Okay, so my suspicion is now certainly at first they would be using the same calendar we have on Earth.
Yeah.
The Martian year is about twice as long as the terrestrial year, and so they would just have Christmas on December 25th, same time as on Earth. They just have it twice in a given Martian orbit.
Yeah.
But as long as Mars is only a few light minutes away, And so Martian colonists would be in heavy communication with Earth. And as long as we're in heavy communication with each other, we're going to need we're going to need a common timekeeping system. That's why, for example, the Gregorian calendar, which was originally a Catholic thing, Protestants didn't, what do they care what Pope Gregory says about the calendar,
Right.
Orthodox, what do they care? Chinese people who are unevangelized, what do they care? Well, because we have a global communications community and trading community, we need a common timekeeping system. And so even though there may be local calendars that are different, the Gregorian calendar has become the standard for purposes of business and communication. And as long as humans remain in contact with each other, like these people on Mars, they're just a few light minutes away, they're going to continue to use the Gregorian calendar. Now, they may have local time of day, just like we have time zones.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, there's going to be a baseline of everyone's going to coordinate to Greenwich Mean Time on Earth. And that'll be used for religious celebrations, including things like Christmas, because it's like, hey, it's December 25th on Earth. Let's not celebrate Christmas because we're on Mars.
Yeah.
No one's going to want to do that. Everyone's going to want to celebrate Christmas.
Right.
So, and certainly the Christians on Mars will. And so it'll stay tied to the universal calendar on Earth. What may happen, and I would expect to happen over time, is that there will be a local Martian liturgical calendar, just like there are different liturgical calendars for countries here on Earth.
Yeah.
So here in the United States, we have a local liturgical calendar that, for example, will have saints on it that are American saints that wouldn't be on like a calendar in Kazakhstan. They might have Kazakh saints on their calendar locally, whereas we would have more American saints on the American calendar. And I would expect the same thing to happen as there come to be Martian saints. They'll get on the Martian calendar.
Yeah.
And so
Martian saints, I love that.
Yeah.
But why not? I mean, Well, actually, yeah, and we're going to have a bishop on Mars, or else we don't want to fall into absenteeism, so he's got to be there in the flesh.
Yeah, and that's standard. That's just like the colonization of the New World. When Europeans started to colonize North and South America, they brought their priests with them at first.
Yeah.
And then they set up a hierarchy of bishops here in the New World, and Mars would just be another new world.
Right. Wow. So many exciting possibilities on the horizon. Well, thank you so much, Jimmy, for joining me for this podcast. I really enjoyed it. I always love listening to your podcast. You do such a great job of, first of all, just researching thoroughly and then breaking everything down super systematically into what we can absolutely verify through research and what's kind of in the realm of like tentative, and then what's in the realm of just, very unlikely. And so it's great for whether you're religious or not religious. I think everybody can appreciate your approach to these paranormal and supernatural topics.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here.
Great. Anything you'd like to plug for the listeners?
So if they want to check out my work for Catholic Answers, they can go to Catholic.com. If they want to check out my work specifically, they can go to JimmyAkin.com. If they want to check out Mysterious World, it's in all the standard podcast directories. You can also reach it by going to mysterious.fm, and it's on YouTube.
Oh, yes.
Where we have a video version of it. So you can go to youtube.com/Jimmy Akin. And in order to get to jimmyakin.com or youtube.com/Jimmy Akin, all you have to do is spell my name right. My first name, Jimmy. It's the normal way to spell Jimmy. My last name, Akin. It's the normal way to spell Akin. It's just 4 letters. It is so easy. AKIN, as in Nancy, or Nebraska, or whatever you want. But it's just AKIN. There are no T's, S's or E's in it.
It feels
Just
like an attack on my
Akin.
last name, which is Depperschmidt, which is lots of T's and S's and E's. Great.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much, Jimmy. And I pray you have continued success with all of your platforms.
Thank you so much.
Right now, where we're recording, I'm right by Port Tobacco, where you did an episode about the blue dog ghost, which was super cool to hear you say Port Tobacco, Maryland on the podcast. I was like, wait a second, I'm right by there, and I've been to the Blue Dog Saloon, and yeah. So if you're ever out here on the East Coast, come on down to Port Tobacco. We'll get you hooked up.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Bye.